So we have here this Alfa 147, the 1.6 twin spark engine. After replacing the alternator, the car does not start. We are here today on the workshop, okay, near Lisbon area, and the car has issues related to the intake valve and the immobilizer, okay. So we'll do a diagnosis to see the voltage, to see the tension of the battery on to the ECU, and see what we can find. Okay, so now we have a problem with so the ECU is coming on and off, like it has a problem with tension. So that will be interesting. So the owner of the workshop over here says that when he removes the intake valve, the problem goes away, obviously, because the ECU can no longer command the intake valve, and the engine light turns on, and the car turns on also. It does not accelerate, obviously. So something is wrong with the intake valve. But he already has a new intake valve, and it is the same. Or is it? Let's see. So on the fault codes, obviously we have here a lot of fault codes related to the intake valve. Obviously, yeah, okay. And down here we have two fault codes related to the master flow meter, okay, and one with the sensor of the temperature of the air. This sensor is inside of the master flow meter, and it can be related one to another. I do not know how many things they disassembled, but possibly if you have a short circuit here on the master flow meter, you can have the issue with something else, because the feeding, the positive and negative to this component, can be linked with other components as well. So the feeding goes to the master flow meter and other sensors, including the sensor inside of the intake valve. So let's go to the live data. So the thing is, with the intake valve disconnected, the car will run. So obviously we have the immobilizer okay, we have RPM okay, we have everything okay regarding things to have to put the car running, okay. What the things that I want to see if they are good are the temperatures, and everything seems okay. You just now have to see on the electrical diagrams what the hell is happening here. Everything is very good. So this system is the latest, okay. We have just the intake valve. We do not have a idle regulator, nothing of that sense, okay. We just have a plug over here with 6 wires that goes from the intake valve directly to the ECU over here, okay. When we have the plug plugged in, the ECU does not communicate with the rest of the car, and that is why we have the immobilizer fault codes and the ABS ESP fault codes. The car having CAN network, all the units will search to try to communicate with the ECU. The ECU cannot respond, and fault codes are thrown at the car, okay, on the cluster and on the diagnosis machine. Like always, I'm trying to find wiring diagrams, electrical diagrams, to see if these 6 wires go directly to the ECU, or if, for example, the positive or the negative or both go to some similar, the fuse box and relay box, or the negative passes through something first before going to the ECU, and that causing a problem in that way. So possibly the issue is really with the ECU. It may be bad. I hope not. I never saw a ECU like this do this symptom over here, but having issues there with the alternator, possibly a problem with the ECU is real. I hope not. I really hope not. I'm just waiting here for the electrical diagrams for trying to finalize here this diagnosis. Turns out, yes, the plug for the intake valve shares some communication or shares some feeding with other sensors. The temperature sensor over here and the cam sensor, the cam position sensor, also shares some feeding, some positives and negatives from that plug over there. So disconnecting here this sensor, the temp sensor, and there the cam sensor, turning on the ignition, the symptom should go away if I had some problem on that sensor or this one. But no, in fact, the symptom continues. The light is still doing the same symptom and the control unit here is at fault. So something happened during the alternator repair. Something happened, okay? And now we have to replace here the control unit for the engine. For a used one, we have to recode the immobilizer. If it is a new one, you just have to code the immobilizer. I was just hoping to get a used one to get in here even without the immobilizer. If the light turns on and I can communicate, it means that the issue is really with ECM. But right now I do not have any diagrams, I do not have any parts, um, so that is that. So here I have a schematic that is I think very simple to understand. And the thing is, this car has the final version, the final form of the intake valve. This intake valve does not use a cable, a steel cable like you used to use on the first models. This one is totally electric. You do not need also to have an idle control valve. This intake does it all, okay? So inside of the valve, of the control part of the module of the valve, of course we have electrical motor to do the movement of the intake valve. That is the motor over here, and for that we need two wires, okay, a positive and a negative. As you can see, the positive goes to the ECU and the negative goes directly to the ECU2. In order to be safe-proof, the wires that go to the positive and negative are duplicated at a certain point. So at a certain point of the wiring, they do a split. If you lose a wire, if a wire breaks or something else is happening with the wires, you always have at least one wire to work with, not to lose your ability to accelerate, okay? Or deaccelerate as well. That leads us to the sensor part of the intake valve. As you may understand, as it moves, you have a twin sensor on the inside to read the actual position of the intake valve, okay? The reasons for that are a bit more complicated than that, and I can explain you if you want me to, but essentially that is it. I do not want to extend the video too much. But the reasons why, very, very quickly, is as you want to put your foot on the pedal and open the intake, you need a certain voltage to do the movement, but then you do not need so much voltage to maintain that position. Okay, so it's not a direct thing. It is a calculated effort to open and another effort to stay open. That is why you need to have the sensor inside. The twin sensors part of the thing is to compare both signals at all times. If one sensor fails, the other one can be read by the control unit. Okay, similar to this thing over here. If one fails, you have the other one to be able to use your accelerator. This will throw obviously a fault code for the accelerator or the intake valve, okay? By the way, the accelerator functions on the same principles. You have a twin potentiometer to see the position of the accelerator pedal at all times. Both read different things. So if one fails, the unit can calculate where is the problem on the pedal. So the intake valve, a electrical motor controlled by the ECU, and the sensors also controlled by the ECU, of course, yes, but the powering of the sensors does not come directly, well, it comes directly from the ECU, but first it feeds here the water temperature sensor, okay, and also feeds the sensor for the camshaft, okay. If you have a short on the temperature sensor or on the cam sensor, it will create a problem on the intake valve. Maybe even create a problem that we are seeing here. However, if you disconnect here this plug, like you saw earlier, the engine runs perfectly, which tells me two things. This sensor cannot be in short circuit, because without it, the engine can crank, but will not run, okay? But also can have here a problem with the water temperature sensor, that being in short can of course affect here the ECU. That is not happening because I was able to disconnect this plug and I was able to disconnect here the cam sensor, even knowing that without that I will not have a functioning engine, but at least I could see that even with this disconnected, the symptom of the blinking check engine light was always present. Okay, so no problems over here and no problems over here. So the positive comes from here, from the ECU, feeds here this sensor, continues into the intake valve, and then you have 2 signals and one negative here to power here the sensors. Okay, so that being said, once disconnected here this plug for the motor, and yes, we tested another intake valve. With this disconnected, the system disappears, which means that the problem is on the inside of the ECU. So you have a controller, you have a chip that controls these signals over here, the signals, the power, and the power over here. So the minus, the power, the signals, and possibly even here the control for the motor, for the electrical motor. So on the inside of the ECU, you have the issue of the short circuit. That is very unfortunate to happen, and I believe I know why that happened. Some work has been done on the car, on that workshop, and in the middle of that, someone possibly made a mistake. Okay, but that is not important right now. Another thing, just to finalize here, the powering of the ECU is done by the relay T9, by the relay box near the engine. So we have here positive and negative, and all that is discarded once we take out this plug and the engine runs, which means that all the negatives, that is not just one, and all the positives, more than 1, 2, are good because the engine runs perfectly, except it does not accelerate because obviously we do not have the plug to do so. However, I did test it all of that just because sometimes things are weird, and everything is cool, everything is really nice, everything is as supposed to be done, except here the ECU kaput. Guys, down on the description there is a lot of stuff that can and will be useful for you. Things related to this video, yes, a lot of stuff about electrics and solutions and problems. I know that these themes are a little bit boring and complicated, but I believe and I hope I'm trying to get you into this with more ease, time and time again, okay? But also other areas of the car. About brakes, for example, a lot of videos about brakes right now, a lot of videos coming out about suspension, how to remove and assembly shock absorbers and top mounts and all that stuff. Okay, problems with power, lack of power on multi-jet engines, crank no start on multi-jet engines, on the gasoline engines as well right now. So really a lot of stuff that can and will be useful for you. Down on the description. Also down on the description there are 2 links for helps for the channel. As you may understand, now on this new phase of the channel, being full-time YouTube, it is really necessary so I can try to keep this going and try to keep this stable. If you want to consider and if you are able to do so, to give me a little bit of a help, I have a tier of about €1.5 a month, because in each country the price goes up and down because of taxes, of course. And I have the PayPal if you want to do just a simple donation, just because. Okay, I see you next time, guys. Bye.